Before hospitals, before microscopes, before we even knew the heart-pumped blood, there was Hippocrates. Born into a world ruled by myth and gods, he dared to ask a different question. What if illness came not from the wrath of deities, but from the body itself? On the island of Kos, amidst olive trees and temples, a physician began observing, recording, treating, not with spells, but with reason. He watched the pulse, examined the sputum, studied the fever, and in doing so, transformed medicine into a discipline of the mind as much as the hand. But the man we call the father of medicine is shrouded in mystery. Did he truly write the famous oath? Did he even exist as we imagine him? In this episode, we peel back the centuries to find the real Hippocrates, the physician, the philosopher, the symbol, and explore how his ideas echo across operating rooms and ethics debates to this day. This is the story of a healer whose legacy outlived the ancient world and shaped every generation of medicine to come. The historical Hippocrates. Our story begins on a sun-drenched island in the eastern Aegean Sea, Kos. It's the 5th century BCE, the classical age of Greece. Here, amidst olive groves and limestone cliffs, a child is born into a lineage that will leave an indelible mark on human history. His name, Hippocrates. To understand Hippocrates, we must first understand his world. Greece in the 5th century BCE was a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each with its own customs, armies, and ambitions. Democracy blossomed in Athens, while Sparta remained a warrior state. Philosophy flourished under figures like Socrates, Plato, and later Aristotle. Art, architecture, and literature achieved new heights. And yet, medicine remained primitive by our standards. Disease was seen as divine punishment. Epilepsy, for instance, was called the sacred disease, thought to be a curse from the gods. Healing was practiced by temple priests who invoked deities like Asclepius, the god of medicine, in hopes of divine intervention. People slept in these temples, hoping for healing visions. Remedies often mixed herbal concoctions with ritual purification and prayer. The birth and lineage of Hippocrates. Into this world stepped Hippocrates, born around 460 BCE on the island of Kos. He came from a line of physicians known as the Asclepiads, a hereditary guild that claimed descent from Asclepius himself. His father, Heraclides, was a physician. His education likely began in this family tradition, but expanded far beyond it. Legend holds that Hippocrates studied medicine under his father and a Thracian physician named Herodicus, and even learned philosophy from the great Democritus. Whether this is fact or embellishment, it suggests that his training was rigorous and wide-ranging. Hippocrates absorbed not just the lore of the temples, but the analytical habits of philosophers. Fact versus myth. Who was the real Hippocrates? But who was Hippocrates really? Separating history from hagiography is no easy task. There are no surviving portraits from his time, and no writings we can confidently attribute to his hand. What we have instead is a reputation, an aura passed down through generations of doctors, scholars, and scribes. Ancient writers like Plato and Galen mention him with reverence. Galen, in particular, writing some 600 years later, made Hippocrates the cornerstone of his own medical philosophy. By the Roman era, Hippocrates had become a symbol of wisdom, rationality, and ethical conduct. Ironically, the very ambiguity of his biography helped elevate him. He became a canvas onto which the ideal physician could be painted. It's possible he was less a singular genius and more the figurehead of a broader movement, the culmination of a shift from mystical to empirical medicine. the wandering healer. According to later biographers, Hippocrates traveled widely throughout the Greek world, perhaps to Thessaly, Thrace, and even as far as the court of Perdiccas II of Macedon. In one tale, he's said to have stopped a plague in Athens by lighting fires to purify the air, more likely a reflection of the airborne miasma theory than actual event, but illustrative of his practical reputation. Whether or not these stories are accurate, they depict a man who was not confined to Kos. Hippocrates, or at least his teachings, were mobile, passed from city to city, scribe to scribe. His name became associated with a style of medicine that emphasized observation, experience, and reason over divine intervention. Kos, cradle of medical change. The island of Kos itself became a hub for medical learning. By the Hellenistic period, a century or two after Hippocrates' death, the island was home to a major medical school and an Asclepieion, a healing temple and early prototype of the hospital. Pilgrims came from across the Mediterranean for treatment. This was no accident. The cultural climate of the time was shifting. The influence of philosophers like Pythagoras and Empedocles had begun to naturalize the body, to explain it through elements, not spirits. The same way Thales had looked for a natural explanation of the cosmos, Hippocrates sought a natural explanation of disease. The result was a new kind of healer, one who listened, observed, and recorded, who asked not what offended the gods but what went wrong in the body. Medicine as craft, not magic. Hippocrates helped redefine the physician's identity. Medicine was no longer sorcery, it was techne, a craft. Physicians were artisans of the body, and like any craft, medicine required skill, training, and humility. He encouraged careful note-taking, regular examination, and cautious prognosis. In the Hippocratic view, healing required time, observation, and patience. It wasn't about sudden miracles, but steady guidance. What he called vis medicatrix naturae, the healing power of nature. The physician's job was not to dominate nature, but to assist it. In a world prone to excess heat, cold, fluid, temper, balance was everything. And the good doctor, like a gardener or a sailor, watched for the right moment to intervene. Hippocrates and his contemporaries. What made Hippocrates stand out wasn't that he worked in isolation, but that he worked within a moment of tremendous intellectual fertility. This was the age of the sophists, the pre-Socratics, the tragedians. Ideas were in the air, about the soul, the body, the universe. The pre-Socratic thinkers, Anaxagoras, Empedocles, Heraclitus, had already begun to speculate that all things, even illness, could be understood by natural causes. Hippocrates absorbed these ideas but brought them down to earth. He applied them to the human body, and in doing so he quietly revolutionized the doctor's role, not as a priest or a shaman, but as a clinical observer, a rational guide, a helper in nature's process of healing. The birth of medical rationalism. Hippocrates marked the beginning of medical rationalism. He insisted that diseases had natural causes and that these could be studied, categorized, and treated through observation. He taught that each patient had a unique constitution, shaped by diet, environment, and temperament. In this, he was ahead of his time. While much of his physiological theory, the infamous four humors, would be debunked millennia later, the structure of his thinking remained sound. He taught that medicine required both science and ethics, both technique and compassion. As one ancient text puts it, life is short, the art long, opportunity fleeting, experience treacherous, and judgment difficult. This wasn't just advice to young physicians, it was a warning to treat medicine with the seriousness, humility, and reverence it deserved. Conclusion to Part 1. A man, a myth, a movement. So, was Hippocrates a single man or a movement, a traveling doctor or a constructed ideal? Perhaps he was all of these, but what's certain is this: he stood at the threshold of a new kind of medicine, one rooted not in superstition, but in study, not in divine will, but in human reason. And while we may never fully know the man who walked the stony paths of Kos over 2,000 years ago, we still walk in his shadow. Every time a doctor studies a chart, listens to a patient, or considers the ethical weight of a decision, they practice a form of Hippocratic medicine. In the next chapter of our story, we'll explore the writings that bear his name, the Hippocratic Corpus, and how they laid the foundation for clinical practice as we know it. If you're enjoying this journey through the roots of medicine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. What survives of Hippocrates is not his bones, nor his sandals, nor even his signature. What survives is thought, collected in parchment and passed across generations, a library of ideas known as the Hippocratic Corpus. It is here, in these texts, that the ancient physician's voice comes closest to ours. It is here we find not just theory, but practice, the day-to-day grappling with illness, pain, uncertainty. And perhaps most striking of all, we find an astonishing humility. The Hippocratic Corpus is a collection of about 70 texts written in Ionic Greek, compiled over several generations. While they bear the name of Hippocrates, modern scholarship agrees they were authored by multiple physicians, likely students and successors within the Kos school of medicine. These writings vary widely in style, purpose, and even medical philosophy. Some are tightly clinical, offering case notes and symptom tracking. Others are theoretical, debating causes of disease. Still others are prescriptive or ethical. The fact that they were preserved together suggests a shared intellectual lineage, a commitment to a medical worldview that sought rational, natural explanations for human suffering. Breaking with the divine, natural causes of disease. Perhaps the most radical idea in the corpus is also its most understated. Disease has natural causes. This idea, now taken for granted, was revolutionary in the 5th century BCE. Take the treatise on the sacred disease. The author opens with a jab. It is thus with regard to the disease called sacred, it appears to me to be no wise more divine, nor more sacred than other diseases. The so-called sacred disease, epilepsy, is explained as a physical disorder, likely involving phlegm obstructing the brain. The author isn't denying the gods, he's denying that illness is best understood through religion. Instead, he urges physicians to observe, analyze, and treat based on reasoned inference, not divine revelation. The Hippocratic Corpus introduced a new identity for the physician, the meticulous observer. These texts emphasize what we now call clinical observation, tracking symptoms over time, noting diet, sleep, excretions, environmental conditions. The doctor wasn't expected to heal through mystical rites or dramatic interventions. Instead, he was a guide, supporting the body's natural healing process. In the treatise Airs, Waters, Places, we see the roots of environmental medicine. Disease is linked to wind patterns, climate, water quality, and even the orientation of a city. The physician must know his surroundings as well as his patient. The humoral theory, balancing the body's fluids. Perhaps the most enduring, if eventually erroneous legacy of the Hippocratic Corpus was the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, health was a matter of balance. Disease arose when the humors were out of proportion. A fever might be caused by excess yellow bile. Melancholy, a word we owe to this tradition, was the result of too much black bile. Treatments aimed to restore harmony. Physicians prescribed diet changes, exercise, bathing, even bloodletting. While we now know these methods were often ineffective or harmful, they reflected a profound insight that the body is a system, and health is a state of equilibrium. Pioneering clinical case histories. Among the most remarkable features of the corpus are its clinical case histories, arguably the earliest in Western medicine. In the epidemics texts, we find records of individual patients, their symptoms, the physician's observations, the course of illness, and crucially, the outcomes. Listen to one such entry. Thesis. In the case of the woman who lay sick of a fever on the 7th day, bowels disordered, urine thin, small with suspended substances, tongue parched, no thirst, sleep disturbed, extremities cold and livid. These aren't just medical notes, they're stories, careful, empathic accounts of people in distress. They show a medicine that was already patient-centered, concerned not only with curing, but with understanding. Prognosis over diagnosis. Modern medicine emphasizes diagnosis, naming the disease, but the Hippocratic tradition leaned more heavily on prognosis, predicting the course. Why? Because diagnostic tools were limited. Autopsy was taboo. There were no lab tests, no microscopes, so Hippocratic doctors watched and waited. They categorized fevers, mapped critical days in illness, and gave careful forecasts. A good physician, they believed, must warn the family what to expect, especially if death was likely. It was, above all, a practice of honesty. No false hopes, no miracle cures, just quiet diligence, guided by nature and time. Medicine and the whole person. Another striking element of the corpus is its view of the patient as a whole person. The texts routinely consider diet, environment, habits, and even psychological disposition. In one treatise, we're told, "It is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has." This holistic perspective would echo across centuries, reappearing in Islamic, Chinese, and Ayurvedic medicine, and resurfacing today in integrative and personalized medicine. To the Hippocratics, the human body was inseparable from its context. The ethical undertone. Though the famous Hippocratic Oath is not part of the main corpus, an ethical undertone pervades these writings. The physician is urged to act with humility, to avoid overpromising, to care deeply for the sick. The treatise Precepts advises, "Wherever the art of medicine is loved, there is also a love of humanity." And in Decorum, a text aimed at younger doctors, we read, "The physician must wear simple clothes, be clean in person, have a steady gait, speak calmly and clearly." These were not just rules, they were ideals. Hippocratic medicine aspired to professionalism long before the word existed. A lasting framework. The Hippocratic corpus did more than describe diseases. It set in motion a framework for how medicine could be practiced. It gave us the case note, the clinical observation, the ethical physician, the healing environment. Yes, it lacked modern anatomy. It misunderstood physiology. It offered treatments that today seem quaint or cruel. But its foundations, observe, record, learn, do no harm, still resonate. In that sense, the corpus is less a relic and more a cornerstone. It reminds us that medicine is not just about tools, but about thinking. The Hippocratic corpus gave medicine its first textbooks, not etched in stone, but written in flesh and blood experience. They were imperfect, yes, but they were also revolutionary. records of a shift from priesthood to profession. And while we may not know exactly who wrote each line, the spirit is unmistakable, a devotion to truth, to observation, to care. In the next chapter, we'll explore perhaps the most enduring Hippocratic legacy of all, the oath, what it meant then, what it means now, and how ethics became medicine's sacred bond. The Oath and Ethics, Medicine's Moral Backbone. There is the oath, a solemn promise whispered across generations, spoken by physicians as they step into a sacred trust. We call it the Hippocratic Oath. But what did Hippocrates really say? And what does it mean for a world of ventilators, vaccines, and artificial intelligence? In this chapter, we trace the ethical spine of medicine, from ancient temples to modern lecture halls, and ask, can a 2,400-year-old pledge still hold us accountable? Origins of the Oath. The Hippocratic Oath appears in the body of texts known as the Hippocratic Corpus, but stylistically and philosophically, it stands apart. Written in formal Ionic Greek, the original oath reads more like a sacred invocation than a clinical manual. It begins not with the patient, but the gods. I swear by Apollo the healer, by Asclepius, by Hygeia and Panacea. These were divine witnesses, invoked to lend weight to the physician's promise. The oath was a binding contract, not only with society, but with the cosmos. Scholars believe it likely emerged in the 4th century BCE, perhaps after Hippocrates' death, as part of the evolving identity of the Physicians' Guild. Whether Hippocrates himself wrote it remains uncertain. What's clear is its influence. It became the ethical North Star of Western medicine. So what does the oath actually say? Stripped of translation gloss, the original text contains several key commitments. Fidelity to teachers, to honor and support the physician's mentors, as one would one's own parents. A vow to do no harm. I will use treatment to help the sick, but never with a view to injury and wrongdoing. Prohibitions against certain practices, notably giving deadly drugs, providing abortive remedies, or performing surgery. Confidentiality, a pledge to keep patient information private. These principles form the ethical DNA of modern medicine. They define not just what a physician does, but how and why. Do no harm, more than a motto. One phrase has become synonymous with the oath, primum non nocere, first, do no harm. Curiously, those exact Latin words don't appear in the original Greek, yet the idea runs through the entire text. Hippocratic ethics are deeply cautious. The physician must weigh not just what is possible, but what is prudent. In a time before antibiotics, before antiseptics, aggressive intervention could be fatal. This caution persists in modern practice, in the ethical dilemmas of aggressive chemotherapy, end-of-life care, and surgical risk. It reminds us that sometimes, restraint is the highest form of healing. Abortion, euthanasia, and ancient boundaries. The original oath contains lines that have stirred modern controversy. I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan. I will not give a woman a pessary to cause abortion. These prohibitions have led some to equate Hippocratic ethics with specific religious stances. But context matters. In ancient Greece, both abortion and physician-assisted suicide were legal and culturally accepted in some city-states. The oath's prohibitions likely reflected a professional code, an attempt to set physicians apart as safe, trustworthy, and morally distinct from executioners or mercenaries. These lines are not necessarily universal truths. They are boundary markers, tailored to a time when medicine was still defining itself. Confidentiality, and the physician's trust. One of the most forward-thinking elements of the oath is its emphasis on patient privacy. Whatever I see or hear, I will keep secret, holding such things to be holy. In a world without hippe or legal protections, this was radical. Trust was, and still is, the bedrock of the doctor-patient relationship. Without it, diagnosis falters. Healing hesitates. Today, this principle is codified in law, but it began as a personal ethical commitment, a sacred trust whispered in the dark between physician and patient. The oath in the Islamic and Christian worlds. As Greek medicine passed into the Islamic world, the oath traveled with it. In medieval Baghdad and Cordoba, Islamic physicians studied and adapted Hippocratic texts, including the oath. The great polymath Avicenna incorporated Hippocratic principles into his own canon of medicine. Later, Christian Europe would reinterpret the oath within a religious framework. The physician became a moral figure, a servant of both God and humanity. In both contexts, the core ideals remained: compassion, caution, confidentiality, humility. Modern adaptations of the oath. The oath we know today has been rewritten many times. In the 20th century, medical schools began using revised versions, dropping references to the gods, adjusting prohibitions, and adding clauses relevant to contemporary medicine. The 1964 version by Louis Lassagne, often used in U.S. graduations, includes lines such as, "I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife." Other versions emphasize patient autonomy, social justice, and cultural humility. Still others include pledges to global health, to environmental responsibility, or to addressing inequality. These adaptations reflect a living tradition, an ethical dialogue stretching across millennia. When the oath is challenged. But what happens when the oath collides with reality? In wartime medicine, when saving lives means choosing who lives. In terminal illness, when do no harm may mean allowing death. In reproductive health, where personal beliefs may conflict with patient autonomy. These are not hypothetical dilemmas, they're everyday decisions. And while the oath provides a compass, it doesn't offer a map. That's the paradox of Hippocratic ethics. It is at once timeless and insufficient. It demands integrity, but leaves room for conscience. It tells us to care, but not always how. Why the oath still matters. So why keep it? Why recite a promise rooted in an ancient world of scrolls and sandals, leeches and humors? Because the oath is not a set of rules. It's a ritual, a rite of passage, a moment of reflection. It asks the budding physician not just what they know, but who they intend to be. In a profession of constant change, new diseases, new technologies, new expectations, the oath remains medicine's moral memory. A whisper from the past reminding us, this is a sacred trust, and you must not forget it. A promise in every pulse. The Hippocratic Oath may be old, it may be imperfect, but it endures, because in the quiet moments, when the diagnosis is grim, when the decision is heavy, when the patient is looking into your eyes, you don't reach for a protocol, you reach for your promise. And in that promise, Hippocrates lives on. Echoes through time, the legacy of Hippocrates. Names fade, temples crumble, but some ideas travel so far and so deep, they never truly vanish. Hippocrates is one such name. His was a voice born in the olive groves of Kos, but it would echo through the wards of Roman clinics, the libraries of Baghdad, the anatomy theaters of Padua, and the lecture halls of Harvard. More than a man, he became a symbol of healing, of rationality, of trust. And his legacy is not just carved in marble busts, but imprinted in every doctor's ethical code and every patient's hope. The transmission of a tradition. After Hippocrates' death, likely around 370 BCE, his reputation began to grow, but not in a straight line. For 2 centuries, his texts were copied, debated, and supplemented. Greek physicians of the Hellenistic period, especially in Alexandria, preserved and studied the corpus. But it was the rise of Rome that gave Hippocratic ideas a broader platform. Roman physicians, especially Galen, elevated Hippocrates into a nearly mythic figure. Galen, whose writings would dominate medicine for over a millennium, treated Hippocrates as both inspiration and authority. Galen didn't just follow Hippocrates, he built on him, synthesized him with Aristotle, and spread his interpretation through the Roman Empire. To understand Galen was to understand Hippocrates. The two became entwined. From Alexandria to Baghdad, the Islamic Golden Age. But perhaps the most vital chapter in Hippocrates' legacy unfolded far from Greece, in the Islamic world. During the Islamic Golden Age, from the 8th to the 13th centuries, scholars in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo translated Greek medical texts into Arabic. Among them, the Hippocratic corpus. These translations became foundational texts in Islamic medicine. The great physician-philosophers, Avicenna, Al-Razi, Ibn al-Nafis, read Hippocrates, wrote commentaries on him, and integrated his ideas into vast medical encyclopedias. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, influenced heavily by Hippocratic and Galenic thought, would be used in European universities until the 17th century. The Islamic scholars didn't just preserve Hippocrates, they interrogated him. They tested his theories, corrected his errors, and added their own discoveries. In this way, Hippocratic medicine became a living tradition. The Renaissance and Scientific Revolution. As Europe emerged from the Middle Ages, Renaissance scholars began rediscovering classical texts. The Hippocratic corpus was retranslated from Arabic and Greek into Latin. Physicians like Andreas Vesalius and William Harvey questioned Galen, but still revered Hippocrates. The age of anatomical dissection, of the printing press, and of empirical science reawakened interest in Hippocratic principles. Clinical observation, environmental analysis, and ethical conduct were emphasized once again. In 1543, when Vesalius published De Humani Corporis Fabrica, he corrected Galen's anatomical errors, but still praised Hippocrates as the original clinical observer. Even in contradiction, Hippocrates was treated as a father figure, a compass pointing toward the humane, rational practice of medicine. From 19th century hospitals to modern medicine. In the 19th century, hospitals became the center of medical learning. Clinical training advanced. The microscope replaced the naked eye. Germ theory replaced miasma theory. And yet, the Hippocratic spirit endured. Figures like Rudolf Virchow, who pioneered cellular pathology, echoed Hippocratic ideals when he said, "Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing more than medicine on a large scale." Florence Nightingale, too, embodied the Hippocratic ethic, treating patients with gentleness, care, and attention to their environment. Even as medicine became more technical, the Hippocratic values of observation, restraint, and ethics remained touchstones. To be a good doctor was still, in essence, to be Hippocratic. ceremony and symbolism, Hippocrates in the modern imagination. Walk into any medical school today and you'll likely find a bust of Hippocrates or a plaque with his oath. White coat ceremonies, a relatively new tradition, often include a reading of a modernized oath, connecting students with the ancient lineage of ethical medicine. Hospitals bear his name. Medical journals invoke him. The term Hippocratic is shorthand for compassionate, evidence-based ethical care. Even in popular culture, Hippocrates is evoked whenever a doctor is called to a higher standard or when medicine itself is on trial. He has become the conscience of the profession. Modern critiques and the limits of legacy. But not all echoes are endorsements. Some modern thinkers critique the Hippocratic legacy for what it leaves out. The original oath, for example, excluded women. Medicine was a male domain in ancient Greece. Today, over half of medical students in many countries are women. The oath also says nothing about equity, consent, or systemic injustice, issues central to contemporary medicine. And then there's the scientific side. The humoral theory is obsolete. Hippocrates knew nothing of bacteria, viruses, or DNA. His methods lacked the experimental rigor we demand today. Yet despite these limits, his core values endure, not because they were flawless, but because they were foundational. Hippocrates in the era of AI and precision medicine. Now we stand at a new frontier, an age of gene editing, personalized medicine, robotic surgery, and artificial intelligence. What does Hippocrates mean in a world he could never have imagined? Quite a lot. His insistence on patient-centered care is more relevant than ever. In a time of big data, it reminds us to see the individual. In an age of automation, it reminds us that medicine is not just a science, it's a relationship. Hippocrates may not have had algorithms, but he had empathy. And that, it turns out, is still the beating heart of healing. A legacy beyond time. Hippocrates has become more than a man. He is a mirror, a memory, a challenge. He reminds us that medicine begins with wonder, at the body, at suffering, at the miracle of recovery. He reminds us that knowledge without ethics is dangerous, and that compassion without skill is incomplete. His name may rest on ancient scrolls, but his legacy lives in every honest diagnosis, every gentle reassurance, every moment a doctor listens more than they speak. And so we end where we began, in the company of a healer who chose reason over ritual, nature over myth, and care over conquest. Hippocrates did not cure all wounds, but he taught us how to begin.